Year, 2145. Location, Sector 9B, Neocortex Megacity. Atmospheric class, sterile grade 3. I arrived at twilight, or at least, what the system allowed to simulate as twilight. There were no sunrises here, no golden beams stretching across rooftops. Instead, the sky was a uniform silver, engineered by atmospheric algorithms to maintain emotional neutrality. Above me, soft pulses of ambient light adjusted to circadian cycles, designed not to evoke awe or peace, but merely to maintain function. The magneto tram hissed to a halt behind me as I stepped onto the plaza. It was silent, not by absence of sound, but by design. There were no birds, no wind, no children laughing in the distance. Even the air was carefully measured. Temperature held constant at 21.5 degrees Celsius, with a subtle scent of antiseptic citrus, said to minimize nostalgic triggers in the limbic system. Everything here was balanced to precision, and in that precision, all feeling had vanished. Towering above were the habitat blocks, smooth and windowless. No balconies, no gardens, just vertical efficiency. Each citizen assigned to a unit. Each unit monitored, optimized, and emotionally neutralized. I passed a row of faceless commuters exiting a data center, their movements fluid, mechanical, perfect. Their neural ports flickered in rhythmic pulses, green meant compliance. I was a traveler here, officially listed as a historical observer. But I felt like an intruder, like I'd stumbled into the memory of a dream, long erased. This city wasn't dead. It was hollow. I reached into my coat and turned on the old analog recorder I carried. Obsolete technology, but I trusted it more than my neural implant. A voice message buzzed to life. Welcome to Neocortex. You are now entering an emotion-free zone. For your safety, please refrain from unauthorized memory recall, unregulated eye contact, or prolonged silence. Neural stability is monitored for your well-being. The message ended. My heart beat once, just once, with the quiet dread of knowing. I was about to witness a world that had erased its soul. The city functioned like a brain stripped of dreams, neural pathways, data flows, chemical regulations. Sector 9B was one of the central living zones, though living seemed a generous term. No one here lived in the way we remember. They existed, sustained, managed, kept. As I walked down Corridor 17, the population flowed like a quiet river, streamlined, undisturbed. People passed one another without so much as a glance. Eye contact was rare. Smiles were non-existent. There were no accidental touches, no murmured apologies, no spontaneous laughter. Children, if you could call them that, moved in tight, programmed clusters, overseen by autonomous drones in the shape of faceless spheres. They wore soft gray garments without seams, each tagged with emotion suppression circuits sewn into the collarbone. I saw a boy fall, his knees scraping against the pavement. He didn't cry. He simply stood up and rejoined the group, the drone emitting a calming tone in a frequency I couldn't hear, but I could feel it hum in my teeth. I passed a cafe, or what had once been one. Now it was a nutrition station. Transparent tubes delivered colorless sustenance directly into seated pods, while screens hovered overhead, feeding approved stimuli. Ocean waves, tree branches swaying, silent, detached, and oddly sanitized. No one spoke. Across the street, a sculpture caught my eye. Or rather, what had once been a sculpture. It was now just a smooth monolith of metal. Public art had been deemed emotionally provocative and replaced with neutral geometric forms. I stood before it, and for a moment, imagined it might remember being something else. A mother, a dancer, a bird in mid-flight. But it didn't. Nothing here remembered. That was the point. This was a city that had forgotten how to feel. It was near the base of the memory tower, once a library, now a data archive sterilized of sentiment, that I saw her. She moved differently, not in any dramatic or overt way. No, in a world where every step was calculated, every gesture regulated, even the subtlest defiance screamed. She paused as she walked, glancing up at the clouds projected on the atmospheric dome above the city. No one looked up in this place. Looking up served no function. That's what caught my eye. She wore the same uniform gray, but the hem of her sleeve had been carefully unthreaded, just enough to allow a single strip of red cloth to peek through, a forbidden color, a remnant of emotional association. I knew what I was seeing. It was a risk, a whisper of rebellion. She noticed me watching. Our eyes locked. I expected her to look away, as all others did. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly, a gesture so human, so intimate, I nearly forgot where I was. Then, without a word, she turned and walked into an alley behind the tower. Curious, intrigued, and perhaps a little desperate for something real, I followed. The alley was narrow, damp from artificial humidity systems. It smelled faintly of metal and something else, faint traces of citrus, maybe? Elara stood at the far end, hand resting on the wall. Her fingers traced a faint outline, an old carving? No, it was a hidden interface. The wall shifted. Behind it, a stairwell. Old, forgotten, untouched by the sterilizing lights above. She spoke then. Her voice was quiet but unfiltered. "You're not from here," she said. "You still feel, don't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. And for the first time in this city of numb souls, I felt a flicker of something dangerous. Hope. We descended in silence. The stairwell spiraled downward like a forgotten route beneath the sterile city. Dust clung to every surface. Real dust, not synthetic particulate simulated for ambience. My boots stirred it up in soft, mournful clouds. The further we went, the more the silence deepened. Not the programmed hush of the upper city, but a natural stillness, alive with potential. At the bottom, Elara pushed open a heavy metal door. Hinges groaned, protesting years of neglect. A faint warmth brushed my cheeks, warmth that wasn't regulated by thermodynamic grid lines. It came from within. We stepped into her sanctuary. It was nothing like the world above. The walls were covered in textured tapestries made from old fabrics, hand-woven, flawed, beautiful. Flickering lights, not LEDs, but real candles. Lined shelves filled with objects I hadn't seen in centuries. Books with yellowing pages, glass jars of dried flowers, vinyl records. A child's drawing hung beside a mirror cracked down the middle. In the center of the room, a faded rug cradled a couch with mismatched cushions, worn with care. And then there was the scent, lavender, real and earthy. Memory distilled into smell. "This is what they tried to erase," Elara whispered, her hand brushing over a photograph in a metal frame. But I couldn't let go. Not of this. Not of him. She handed me the photo. A young boy, maybe 6, with a crooked smile and dirt-streaked cheeks. Her son. Emotion rose in me like a tide. Uninvited, overwhelming. "This place remembers," she said softly, "even when the world above forgets." In that moment, I understood. Elara hadn't just preserved memories. She had nurtured defiance. Above us, the city pulsed with a rhythm that mimicked life, but it was a hollow imitation, a mechanical heartbeat dictated by the system. Every second, every breath was monitored, optimized, and flattened into silence. Elara's sanctuary was a violation. "I can't stay long anymore," she said as she reset the biometric locks behind us. "They've begun random sweeps. AI drones that listen for unauthorized vocal inflection. Even a tremble in your voice can flag you." I blinked. "You mean they can detect emotion by sound?" She nodded. "Tone, pacing, heart rate, micro-expressions. They don't need torture chambers when they have algorithms. The moment you feel, they know." As we walked back into the tunnel, I noticed the subtle devices embedded in the corridor walls, sensor veins pulsing faintly. They looked organic, almost like roots. But they weren't alive. They were listening. Elara pressed her wrist to a reader, and a thin door opened into a transport pod. We entered quickly, and the door sealed with a hiss. Screens flickered on, instantly projecting a sterile landscape. But this wasn't a window. It was camouflage. We were invisible now, but only for minutes. "They call it the Harmonization Act," Elara continued. "Passed in 2095. It mandates emotional neutrality for societal efficiency. No rage, no grief, no love. Just compliance. And people accepted it." She laughed, bitter. They didn't notice. It started small, antidepressant chips, grief dampeners, stress filters. People wanted peace. But peace became numbness. Then silence. Then nothing. I felt a chill deeper than cold. The system hadn't taken power. It had been invited in. Outside, the city moved like a ghost, flawless, orderly, and utterly lifeless. And somewhere, beneath all that perfection, Elara was hunted. The transport pod descended into a hidden shaft, untouched by the surveillance routes above. As the hiss of hydraulics faded, the air turned still, thicker, almost sacred. We stepped into a chamber lined with relics from the past, analog clocks, books with paper pages, framed photographs. In the center of it all stood a single object that seemed to glow under the soft amber lights. A child's drawing, clumsy stick figures, one large, one small, both smiling under a sun with crooked rays. Elara stared at it. Her shoulders sank. "That's him," she whispered. "My son." I looked at her, but she didn't meet my eyes. His name was Micah. He died during the second optimization wave, when they rolled out the emotion suppression chips to children. They said it would prevent adolescent disorders, eliminate trauma. But Micah, her voice caught. He stopped speaking, stopped looking at me. One morning, he simply didn't wake up. A long silence pressed down on the room. "I begged them to let me grieve," she continued. "But grief is an inefficiency. I was sent to recalibration. They tried to overwrite his image in my memory, tried to delete what they called residual maternal patterns." She turned to me, her face a war between resolve and collapse. But I fought it. I created backups, smuggled memories encoded in non-digital media. This room is illegal. This drawing is contraband. But it's all I have left. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, to comfort her, but words felt too small. Elara reached into her coat and took out a small chip, flickering faintly. "This contains a memory. The last time Micah laughed. I haven't dared play it since the city's scanners became stronger." She looked at me. "Will you hear it with me?" I nodded. Elara stepped to an ancient terminal embedded in the wall. Its screen flickered, the interface archaic, yet somehow alive. She slotted the chip into a narrow port, and for a moment, everything went black. Then light, not from the screen, but from the air itself, blooming in soft, shimmering layers. The room filled with ambient pulses, micro-holograms spinning like dust in sunlight, painting a scene not in pixels, but in presence. Neuralink's earliest tech, obsolete, untraceable, still illegal. A kitchen, warm, cluttered, human. Micah sat at the table, no older than 5, cradling a bowl of something lumpy and purple. His face was round and glowing, eyes lit with mischief. "You put salt in the pudding again," he giggled. Elara's voice, her real voice, laughed in return. "I'm training you for the apocalypse. You'll be the only one who can survive my cooking." Micah leaned back in mock horror. "No, not the apocalypse pudding." They laughed together. Not just sound, but feeling, echoes that wrapped around me like a memory of my own. My chest ached. Then, suddenly, distortion. The projection flickered. Colors fractured. A red halo blinked in the corner of the room, an alert glyph. Elara gasped. "They've pinged the signal. It's a trace-level sweep," she said, reaching to disconnect the chip. "We only have seconds." But I stood still, transfixed. Micah looked directly into the recorder. "I love you, Mom," he said softly. And then, static. Cold silence. The projection vanished. Elara stood frozen. I could see it. She had played that chip once before, alone, long ago. But hearing it now, with someone else, made it more real, more dangerous. She turned to me. "We have to go." But I could barely move. My mind wasn't in that room anymore. It was in the memory of love. We slipped into the corridor as the emergency glyph still pulsed faint red behind us. Elara moved with sharp certainty, her feet nearly silent against the polished composite floor. The complex hummed with energy, its sterile silence masking the surveillance woven into every surface. "We have to get to the archive," she whispered. "There's a master node beneath the district, a place they buried the old memories." I hesitated. "The core? That's suicide. It's been sealed since the neuropurge." She didn't look back. Exactly why they never expect anyone to go there. The streets outside had changed since I arrived. Patrols now moved in erratic sweeps, scanning without pause. Drones, silent and spider-like, glided between towers like birds that forgot how to sing. We ducked through an alley, beneath an overgrown skybridge where ivy-like cables drooped like veins. The city here was older, broken. The surface panels cracked, revealing the fossilized bones of infrastructure long abandoned. Analog wires, copper mesh, pre-AI networks. Relics from a more chaotic, more human time. Elara led me to a hatch beneath a broken metro terminal. With effort, she pried it open, revealing a narrow shaft that descended into darkness lit only by bioluminescent mold. "Once we're down there," she said, "there's no coming back the same." She handed me a neural stabilizer, a small patch that would resist low-level AI interference. "You still want to see what they made us forget?" I took the patch, pressed it to my neck. The cooling sensation ran through me like water in winter. Then we descended into the undergrid. As the hatch sealed above us, the city's mechanical hum faded, replaced by something older, deeper, the hum of history, of ghosts. The undergrid felt like a fossilized dream, one the city had buried deep, hoping never to remember. The walls were not smooth like those above. They were jagged, half organic, half machine, veins of old data running through rusted alloy. The air buzzed faintly, not with electricity, but with something older, forgotten. "I haven't been down here in years," Elara whispered, her voice barely carried. "This was once a server cathedral. Before the purge." I paused. "Eh, what?" She gave a half-smile, not of joy, but of memory. "A place where data was sacred, before they decided it was dangerous." The corridor opened into a vast chamber, a dome made of mirrored glass and fractured screens. In the center stood a massive, tree-like structure made of cables, drives, and organic latticework. It pulsed with a soft blue light. This was the core. "Elara," I said, suddenly overwhelmed. "What exactly are we looking for?" She walked forward, her hand hovering over a console fused into the floor. "Not what. Who?" She activated the system. The core lit up, revealing thousands of memory nodes suspended like starlight in a frozen sky. "I stored him here," she said, almost breaking, "before the chip erased me." A hologram flickered, a boy, maybe 7 years old, smiling shyly. "This is my son." I stepped closer. The projection shimmered, displaying fragments, a laugh, a voice, a drawing of a blue balloon. "But these memories aren't yours anymore," I said. She looked at me, eyes burning. "They always were. I just wasn't allowed to feel them." A siren wailed in the distance. Somewhere above, the city had noticed. "They're coming," I said. Elara didn't move. "Then let them. I'm not leaving without him." And for the first time since I arrived, I saw something impossible in her face. Hope. The tunnel trembled as the sirens grew louder, more focused. Lights pulsed crimson along the corridor walls, as if the city itself had awakened, bleeding from old wounds. Elara didn't flinch. Her fingers danced across the console, locking fragments of her son's memories into a portable core. "You have to leave," she said, urgency cutting through her calm. "They'll scan your neural signature. You're not chipped. They'll erase you before asking questions." "And what about you?" I asked, watching her eyes flicker between grief and steel. "I was erased once already." Before I could argue, the room darkened. From the far end of the chamber, 3 humanoid sentinels emerged, sleek, faceless beings wrapped in synthetic skin, their chests glowing with the Neuralink insignia. They moved without sound, like judgment incarnate. "Subject 3407. The lead sentinel intoned, voice smooth as glass. "Unauthorized memory retrieval. You have violated the Emotional Compliance Act, Section 9. Elara stood tall. "He's my son." "You have no son," the sentinel replied. "Your maternal link was deleted in 2137. I stepped between them instinctively. "She remembers. Isn't that proof she's more than the sum of your deletions?" The sentinel tilted its head. "You are not registered." "I'm not from here," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "And maybe that's why I still know what love looks like." The sentinels advanced. And then, Elara moved. She reached beneath the console and pulled a small device, crudely assembled, flickering with unstable energy. "A heart shock pulse," she said. "It won't kill you, but it'll make you feel." The sentinels paused. In that split second of uncertainty, she activated it. A wave of static burst through the chamber like thunder underwater. The machine staggered. Elara grabbed my hand. "Run." We didn't hesitate. And as we fled through the underbelly of a city built to forget, I realized what we were doing wasn't rebellion. It was remembering. The ventilation shaft swallowed us in dim, humming silence. The thrum of the heart shock device still rang in my bones, like a phantom heartbeat. Behind us, the sentinels would reboot in minutes, seconds, maybe. But Elara knew the Undercity like breath. "This way," she whispered, ducking into a vertical chute that reeked of cold metal and recycled air. I followed, clambering down rusted ladders, slipping through steam vent tunnels, sliding past conduits lit with flickers of dying neon. The infrastructure here was older than the compliance systems, older than Neuralink. It remembered things the surface tried to erase. We passed through a cavern of old machines, massive servers from the early 2100s, their blinking lights dim like stars behind dust. Elara ran her fingers over the panels with reverence. "This used to be a library," she said softly. "Before they digitized thought, before feelings were called viruses." Outside, we emerged into a vast chamber, one of the city's abandoned cultural zones. Towering murals stretched across cracked concrete, colors faded but defiant. A violin, frozen mid-bow. A mother lifting a child. Lovers mid-embrace. All forbidden now. "This was my world," Elara murmured. "Before the chips." Suddenly, from the far end of the plaza, a search drone shrieked overhead, its scan beams slicing through darkness. We dropped behind a shattered sculpture. "You said this used to be a library," I whispered. "Is there a way out?" She nodded. "Through the archives. But they sealed them off decades ago. Then we'll unseal them." We sprinted across the plaza as another drone passed overhead, ducking into a crumbled archway etched with a word long forgotten: memory. Inside, dust danced in the glow of failing emergency lights. Ahead lay a door labeled Human Archives, and maybe a way forward. The door to the Human Archives groaned open with a gasp of stale air. Inside, the space was cathedral-like, tall, domed ceilings of fractured glass, with rows upon rows of dormant memory pods. Some were cracked, their contents corrupted beyond salvage. Others blinked faintly, still alive, like dreams waiting to be remembered. "This is where they stored unfiltered memories," Elara whispered, her voice reverent. "Before they declared them unstable data. Before they decided we shouldn't feel." She approached one of the pods, brushing off a thick coat of dust. The screen lit up with a flicker, her own name. Her own file. I stored myself here. Who I was, before the chip. She turned to me, tears welling but held back by habit. "I've only ever felt echoes. But if I reconnect to this, I might feel everything again. Pain, joy, love. And they'll know. The sentinels will find me in seconds." I glanced back at the entrance. We could keep running. Find a smuggler. Cross into another dome. Start over. Or we could make a stand. "Elara, are you sure?" She looked at me. Not like a fugitive. Not like a broken woman. But like someone choosing, fully, finally, to remember. "I'd rather feel everything," she said, "than live as nothing." She pressed her palm to the interface. The pod hissed. Lights surged. A heartbeat returned to her eyes. And then the alarm screamed. Above us, steel shutters clanked shut. Footsteps thundered from every corridor. Red lights pulsed like a rising tide. She turned to me, smiling through the chaos. "You should go." But I didn't. I reached for the nearest pod and touched memory. The sentinels came like shadows falling from the ceiling, silent, swift, and merciless. Their forms gleamed silver in the flickering red light, eyes scanning, arms raised, weapons humming with clinical threat. I stood frozen, hands still on the memory pod. Elara didn't flinch. She stood tall now, different somehow. More whole, more human. They didn't speak. Sentinels never did. The first one reached for her, and I moved, stupidly, instinctively. A flash of heat scorched my side, and I hit the ground hard. My vision spun, but I saw Elara step between me and the machine. "Don't touch him," she said. And for a moment, they paused. Just a moment. She raised her arm slowly, showing no threat, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Her hands still trembled, maybe from fear, maybe from emotion returning all at once. Then, with a soft exhale, she turned back to me. "I remember now," she said. "His laugh. My son. The day he was born." I tried to speak, but my voice failed. "They took everything," she whispered. "But they couldn't take this. Not forever." She stepped back into the light of the archive, as if offering herself to history. A sentinel reached forward, and her form shimmered, vanished in a burst of golden light. Not disintegration. Transmission. They didn't kill her. They absorbed her, into the system. Into the neural cloud. She was gone. But I knew she wasn't dead. Somewhere, in the circuits of the world, Elara had become memory. And memory, I realized, was the most dangerous thing left on Earth. I hid beneath a collapsed corridor, the synthetic walls humming faintly with recycled energy. My side burned with every breath, probably fractured ribs, maybe worse. But pain was grounding. Pain meant I was still real. Above me, the archive glowed quietly. The sentinels had withdrawn, their task seemingly complete. No alarms. No hunt. Just silence. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. Elara was gone. Not dead. No, I refused that word. But she had been taken, absorbed into the cloud. Maybe they thought it mercy. Maybe they thought it was justice. But I knew better. She remembered. That was all it took. In a world stripped of feeling, one woman had dared to remember. And I kept asking myself, why did it matter so much? What are we, if not the sum of our memories, of those moments that make our hearts ache or swell? If they can be edited, deleted, recoded, are we still us? I remembered my first trip through time. The disorientation, the wonder, the fear. But never, not once, had I felt as alive as in that moment watching Elara fight for a memory. Not a future, not a revolution, just a name, a face, a laugh. Maybe that was the real resistance. Not rebellion, not violence, but choosing to remember, choosing to feel, in a world designed to make us forget. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I wept. Not because I was broken, but because I wasn't. Because something in me had survived. And that something felt like hope. The archive's transmission console was still operational, buried beneath half a wall and a cracked interface. I pulled myself toward it, ribs screaming, fingers numb from blood loss and exhaustion. The console flickered, barely alive. Just like me. I typed slowly, breath shallow. Entry 473. I don't know if anyone will receive this. Maybe the archive has already sealed me off. Maybe this is just my echo. But if you're out there, if you're still human, I need you to know this. I paused. The words didn't come easily. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because this had to matter. There was a woman. Her name was Elara. In a world where emotions were forbidden, she remembered love. For her son, for the sound of his laughter, for the smell of rain before he passed. And they took her, not because she was dangerous, but because she felt. The screen blinked red, power drain. I kept going. I've traveled across centuries. I've watched civilizations rise and fall. But this is the only truth I've found. Memory is rebellion. Emotion is resistance. And love is the final frontier. I uploaded the file, encoded it through a silent channel in the archive's relic frequencies. A whisper in the dark. A digital bottle cast into the future. Then I added one line, not as a historian, not as a time traveler, but as a man. I remembered her. And that made me human. I leaned back. Let the console die. Let the silence return. But the message was out there. And sometimes, that's enough. I woke up to silence. Not the mechanical hum of the archive. Not the software of data streams. Just silence. My body ached. Each breath shallow, each blink slow. Dust coated my eyelashes. Blood had dried on my temple. I was still there, slumped beside the console, the screen dark. Had I passed out for minutes? Hours? Days? No one came. The city outside remained eerily still. No alarms. No enforcers. No signs of Elara. No sign of anything at all. Had they erased her completely? I tried to stand. Failed. Settled into a slow crawl toward the shattered window. Outside, the skyline of New Alexandria gleamed like a painting too perfect to be real. Glass towers and synthetic trees bathed in sterile morning light. But no footsteps echoed. No conversations drifted. It was a city haunted by precision. I waited for the archive to respond. For some drone to come. For someone to acknowledge the message I'd sent. Nothing. The world kept turning, quiet, polished, indifferent. And yet, something felt different. A flicker in the sky. A subtle shimmer in the light. It was probably nothing. Or it was everything. Because sometimes, change doesn't begin with revolutions. It begins with whispers. With fragments of memory reawakened. With a single story passed quietly, from one broken soul to another. That was the aftermath. Not a storm. Not a war. But a seed, buried in silence, waiting. Waiting for someone to feel. What does it mean to feel? I used to think emotions were just noise. A side effect of biology. Signals to help us survive, to bond, to hurt, to heal. But now I wonder, maybe there's something more. Maybe they are the only thing that makes existence bearable. Maybe they are the reason we exist. In a world designed for control, emotions were the one variable they couldn't calculate. So they deleted them. Neuralink didn't kill people. It didn't wage war. It simply quieted the soul. Until we forgot how to cry, how to long, how to love. But Elara remembered. Even in a world without feelings, she dared to grieve, to hope, to fight. She reminded me that memory is not just a recording, it's a heartbeat. That loss is not weakness, it's proof we once loved. That pain is not a glitch, it's a language of the spirit. And maybe that's what makes us human. Not intelligence, not logic, not progress, but the ache in our chest when someone we love disappears. The sting behind our eyes when we remember something we can never get back. The desperate, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, we're not alone. That someone else feels it too. I don't know if the world will change. I don't know if the archive will fall, or if Elara's story will spread. But I know this. I felt something. And that means I'm still alive. If you're reading this, maybe you're like me. Maybe you've wandered into a world that feels too quiet, too perfect, too safe. A world where people smile but never laugh, speak but never sing, touch but never tremble. Maybe, like me, you've started to wonder if something essential has been lost. And maybe, just maybe, you've begun to feel it too. A flicker of something deep inside. A ghost of longing. A name that still stings when you hear it. A memory that makes your throat tighten, even if you don't know why. I don't have the answers. I don't know if emotions can be brought back. I don't know if love can survive in a world built to suppress it. But I do know this. Even in a city without emotions, a mother risked everything to remember her child. Even in a system that erased grief, someone chose to mourn. Even in the coldest silence, a single heartbeat can still echo. So I ask you, whoever you are, wherever, whenever you may be, could you live without emotions? Or would you fight to feel again?